people sitting in for others, and how do you deal with the vote of the individual council members?
Sure, we'll go ahead. Yeah, so the statute, it really doesn't specify, but if a member asks for someone to sit in, we accept that. So we have that on the Mountain Division where, so it's, if you represent Falmouth. In terms of those who aren't present, again, we can decide here, but in the previous council, I did contact them outside this process and got their vote as well. It's helpful, since we have it on video, that they could watch the video. So I'd ask them to do that if they provide their vote. But again, I'll let you guys talk about whether you want that. I guess there's only a couple folks that aren't here. But we would like to hear from everybody, all 15 members, even those who aren't here. So yeah, that's really it. And we'd ask, in terms of the voting, again, how we did it in the past. There's the 3 options on the table: the rail use, we can talk about that, the interim trail, and the trail with rail. So that's, we'd like to hear from everyone on which of those options you see as a future land use. We did on the Mountain Division have, folks who opted not to vote, so they chose not to vote. So that's, a possibility. We did have a few of those and the others who abstained from voting. So that's always an option. Yeah, that's really it.
Well, I would thank you, Nate. I'd like to thank everybody who was able to come to the public hearing. We had close to 200 people there, and over, 64 to 65 comments that were made. And it was an interesting mix. I think some really good information, and I think it was spread out pretty much all over the region. I think we even had somebody from Saco testify. I was kind of surprised at that. So that was a real commitment to come up to Cumberland and vote. So, but everybody was respectful, and we got to the end, and it was, oh gosh, I think over an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, but it went very well. So for today, what I'd like to do is basically ask if the group is ready to select one of the 3 options to move forward for a recommendation. I think Nate addressed it pretty well. One is the kind of rail. It's almost like the status quo process. The second one would be a trail until rail, which is kind of no train, no nothing. And the third is kind of a combination, a hybrid of both. And we'll do what we've done at the last meeting because of the size of the group, try to limit your comments to 2 minutes. I've got the clock up there. It's not as obnoxious as it was last time. It's a little lower in volume, so, but it's just so we can get around and just get folks, everybody involved in the conversation. So is everybody, Tony, before we start?
To clarify what you said, the 3 options is 1, do nothing.
Yeah.
2, tear up the railroad infrastructure, and 3, do both.
In your mind, yes, that's what I said. The second one was a trail until rail, which you're right. If it's a trail until rail, the rails will come out. So, and the third option is both.
Hey, Bill, what is regardless of how people vote, process-wise, to what end? So the room is split. Voting, people are voting for different outcomes, then what does that vote tell us? What is the next step after that?
So the next step after that would be to look at the minority position. So there would be a majority position and a minority position. And we would basically look at comments from the minority group as well. If you had a chance to look at the Mountain Division vote, it was pretty simplistic. It was what the majority was, yep, and then what the minority was. And the minority had a paragraph there, but they also had several pages in the appendix.
And because we have 3 options, there will be 2 minorities and 1 majority. Hypothetically.
Hypothetically, right.
Okay.
Right. If you want to be that third minority.
No, I'm just wondering, essentially what I'm trying to get at is, regardless of what people's opinions are,
right, the
purpose of this process today is not to debate or pontificate, but simply to state where we currently stand. And based on those standings, we will have ideally a majority opinion of what of the 3 options we move forward with as the majority report. And then even if you are not in that majority, you still have the right and privilege of putting your opinion into this document as a minority report.
That's correct.
Clarity.
Tony?
I think you said that we're not here to discuss anything, we're just gonna vote. I think I would disagree that we are here to pontificate a little bit.
Well, if
No,
you-
what I said is we're not here to debate or pontificate for the sake of that. We're here to vote, such that we're stating where we currently stand on the three issues for the purpose of developing the report. We're not here to, this is a question.
No, it is a good
Purpose today,
question.
a working group session such that we're trying to convince people of our opinion, or is the purpose here to state where we stand so that we can develop the opinions in the report?
Yeah, I hate to say yes, but kind of yes. I think it's important that if people have any points of clarification they'd like to have from our staff, from the DOT staff or VHB, we have them here, that would be good before you wanted to vote. If you had a point that you didn't understand that Phil might have presented, or something that you went through the report and had a question on, that would be okay.
Got it.
And then I'd like to get to the vote, and then just which option you prefer, and you'll have your 2 minutes of pontification. So,
Thank you.
Can we give
Jonathan.
both of them a minute for the time they've already
Please do.
Are there any points of order or questions to VHB or to the DOT staff before we get started related to the report or the process or any clarifications? Scott?
No, just again, clarification, so we have one more meeting scheduled?
Hopefully not.
Okay, so the intent is to hopefully come to some sort of conclusion today?
I'd like to come to a conclusion today, because that is, again, a recommendation to the commissioner.
And if needed, we can meet one more time, but we hope.
We could if we had to, yeah.
Thank you.
There's nothing that precludes that, it's other than,
Right,
Okay.
right.
I thought there was gonna be change. I thought we were
if necessary, we could meet again, but we will see where we get to today, and if we can't come to a conclusion today, it'll be at the next meeting. Jonathan?
I fully expect that Auburn's position will be one of the minority positions, but it's been my expectation that there would be a January meeting. So when we've confirmed we're in the minority position, I want to make sure that we can put forward what our minority recommendation is in writing. So I didn't bring that in writing. I would rather have a chance to have done that writing, consulted with some of our additional stakeholders, and we could do that last meeting virtually, so I could circulate that to the group, so it's clean and people can see that language even if they don't agree. I just want to share that I'd like to be able to have one additional step, so I'm not trying to wordsmith that minority recommendation.
I think that's fair, and I think one of the things that Nate and I did talk about was just having the ability of the council to look at those, both majority and minority reports, so they could say, yes, that's kind of what we talked about, and that's where my vote stands, and, we could do, but how do you get to those positions unless you vote? So to me, I think if we voted today, then we can work on the majority and the minority report and have those approved or reviewed at the January meeting, and we could do that by Zoom if the majority wants to do that by Zoom.
Mr. Chair?
Chris, go ahead.
I may suggest, unless there's objections, that we go around once and everyone has their 2 minutes. That'll take, 20, 30 minutes. Provide any final input that we have, and perhaps, put our cards on the table with respect to a recommendation, and then we go around a second time and truly put everything on the table to the extent we're able to today.
All right, Chris, do you want to start?
Jeez. All right, I'll go. You could start the timer. And I don't think I'll get to everything in 2 minutes, but I want to thank the consultant team for their work. I want to thank Maine DOT for facilitating the process. Especially wanted to thank the members of the public, over nearly 800 that took the time out of their busy schedules to attend meetings, these council meetings, to attend the public meeting on December 5th down the road, and then provide written comment. The public input's really valuable to this process, and it's one of the reasons why I'm currently in support of a paved trail until rail alternative. The vast majority of public participants in this process seem to support a trail alternative. They support trail for a number of reasons, from safety, quality of life, environmental benefits, tourism, to commuting. One gentleman at the December 5th meeting remarked that it's part of something bigger, that it wouldn't just be a standalone trail, that it'd be part of the fabric of the active transportation network in the region. At the public meeting, about 41 supported an alternative, 41 that spoke supported a trail alternative. And whether it was a member of the public that's 20 or someone that's 70 years old, those supporting a trail want to see it happen, and they want to see it happen soon. And that brings me to my second point, which is feasibility. A paved trail until rail is estimated to cost about $55 million. A rail with trail with no rail improvements is $94 million. A rail with trail with passenger rail improvements is more like $329 million. We've all seen the rail alignment. We've seen the constrained right-of-way in places. We've seen topographical challenges, the need to expand or widen bridges. If we did have a rail-to-trail alternative, that's evident on the Presumpscot River crossing, the Falmouth Spur underpass, the Veranda Street underpass. These are like very huge, complex places in the region. So my time's up. I'll continue.
Thank you, Chris. Dick?
Oh, love that.
I thought Chris was quite eloquent, and I agree.
Okay. Angela?
Yes, trail until rail.
Diane?
Rail until rail. New Gloucester's still not going to take a position.
Okay, that's fair. Jonathan?
The Auburn City Council voted 7-0 on Monday evening to support rail with trail.
Tony?
The Maine Rail Transit Coalition has a plan for initiating passenger rail service on the state of Maine-owned railroad network. Our plan was based on the FTA New Starts grant to the state of Maine, and our report was published in 2013. It's called a Smart Growth Mobility Project. It's a plan for interurban light rail transit on the SLR. It was presented to every community on the corridor, the Maine Department of Transportation, the Portland Area Comprehensive PACs, plenty of media coverage, including an unveiling of the plan at the University of Maine with representatives from the federal EPA, HUD, and DOT, including Bombardier Transportation out of Canada. The Smart Growth Report was the basis for a series of legislative acts, including the 2015 resolve to initiate a service development plan on this railroad to Lewiston, Auburn. Today, that's known as the 2019 VHB-LA plan. That legislation, along with other bills in support of the concept of passenger train service, set the stage for planning development process is defined in the FTA Capital Improvement Grant Guidelines. The plan is now advanced to the stage, however, where we have an actual train that can be used to demonstrate the service, engineering reports on the SLR defining what needs to be done. DOT has provided us with leasing and operations requirements, and the MRTC is now prepared to engage in an independent service development plan for presentation to the state. The MRDC has identified clear problems with VHB work, both in the LA process and this one. The state of Maine has initiated a policy reviewing rail corridors for non-rail uses last year, and of course, they've also supported this process to establish converting use of railroads to recreational trails. This rail committee was established, and for the first time since the 2011 Small Start study, the state engaged a consultant to review the entire length of the SLR, including downtown Portland. MRTC was invited to attend, and we've shared our plan for rail use, and we are looking at the highest and best use of the strategic railroad transportation asset. I could go for about another minute, but shut me off, you can. I've got the, we just were able to send our plan, our position out today, and I have it in writing, including what we call a robust network of rail that's been in existence in the state of Maine since about 100 more years. So when we talk about a robust network of recreational trails, I suggest we were here first. So I could finish, but I guess our position is going to be that as much as we believe that it's time to do a rail corridor on that, I agree that we should look at rail with trails. And the purpose, of course, is a rail, and then we'll see if a trail will fit in there. So we will support a recommendation to the commissioner that a rail with trail is evaluated by the state of Maine for the use on the St. Lawrence and Atlantic Railroad corridor. And I really trust the rest of you do not really want to tear up those railroad tracks.
Thank you, Tony. Amy? That one you might have to get very close to. Is it? Let me check if it's on. You might have to hold it for a little bit.
Looks like it's on now.
I think so.
Can you hear it?
Yep.
Hi, just for people I don't know, I'm Amy Kuhn. I'm on the town council in Falmouth, and I also represent Falmouth in the State House. I'm here today for Hope Cahan, who has been sitting on this body, and it looks like I've come in from nowhere, but I've actually been following it very closely since the beginning, including watching the 2 hours of public testimony the other night. So I'm very pleased to be here and participate in this process. Falmouth votes for trail until rail for all of the health, environmental, and economic benefits that have been articulated in prior meetings. While the trail with rail appears to be technically possible, in our view, it's not practicable given the increased expense and delay. Falmouth residents have expressed an overwhelming viewpoint that the highest and best use of this of this corridor is trail, and we want to see that happen as quickly and cost effectively as we can do it. So going to trail seems to be the best way for us to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. I'm probably going to surprise most of you, but I am really concerned about the tracks being removed as part of this process, and I can't get that out of my head. When I look at Lewiston, Auburn, and I look at Portland, the two most heavily populated metropolises in the state of Maine, it's really hard for me to say we can't figure out a way to do some type of passenger rail system. And it might not be today, it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, but I can't get that out of my head, especially having been in Europe this past October and just frustrated by how we got our growth rules and laws so wrong and how we got our transportation so wacky. So I've expressed to my council on Sunday that I was going to support a rail with trail. I do not believe the trail will fit everywhere on this corridor. I think there'll have to be some creative connectivity, just like the Eastern Trail Network is. But to abandon the thought of being able to connect the two most populated centers in our state and not be able to come back to some type of rail system I just can't do that. And as a civil engineer, I rode that corridor twice on the truck, and I just kept coming back to there are ways to get off the trail and then back on the trail, and there are large segments of that corridor that could co-locate a train and a path system. So I'd hate to abandon that without further study. I think there should be more groups at the table. It's hard for me to agree with Tony on anything, but he's brought up a lot of good points that, for me, I just have a hard time just dismissing those out of hand. And Jonathan has done a good job as well in really expressing the connectivity of the Lewiston to Portland run. So for that reason, my recommendation is going to be the rail with trail. Charles, I'm looking around the table and going, they can't vote. No break for you, man. So.
Okay, thank you. You made some great points, Bill. Certainly, the St. Lawrence Atlantic Railroad is interested in preserving it for the purpose of rail. That's the reason it was purchased by the state. That's the reason it was sold to the state. And that's the reason we retain freight operating rights on the corridor today. A couple of things. It's hard to be on this committee and try to predict what the future will be. In the last 2-3 years, we've seen 2 Class 1 railroads return to the state of Maine, the Canadian Pacific and the CSX, by purchasing lines that were probably close to abandonment, but they were certainly short line regional railroads. So the face of transportation in the railroad industry has changed and will likely continue to change. I personally would have never guessed that we would see 2 Class 1 railroads back in the state of Maine. So predicting the future is tough. Removing the tracks would definitely restrict the options. It just makes it a huge challenge to ever return it to rail service. We're interested in keeping the tracks in place. I will add one caveat that we have other railroads that we operate in other states that don't belong to us that have rails with trails. So if it's beyond our control, that's where we stand.
All right, so your position would be a rail with trail or a rail only?
Rail only, but if you want to put an asterisk that says we do operate other locations with rail with trail, that's fine. one quick additional thing. There's been a lot of discussion about benefits of the trail, health, economic environment. I read in detail the VHB report, which is a pretty good report actually, but it did not delve into the type of benefits that would be in place by converting freight to rail. That's what I got.
Thank you, Charles. All right, Nate?
As a longtime fan of Thomas the Tank Engine, but no railroad engineer myself, I have thoroughly enjoyed this process and learned a lot from everybody here, so thank you. Thank you for that, genuinely. Our recommendation to the commissioner is on the lines of feasibility and timeliness. And for the lens of talent attraction and retention, the time is yesterday for Maine to position itself as a great place to live and work. And so I think I made similar comments a while back when we were talking about the timelines associated with various amounts of work. Our recommendation is going to tie to the worst thing we could possibly do is to do nothing and to continue underutilizing the current asset that's there. And so our recommendation comes with an asterisk as well, but I don't intend to print this, to be based on the feasibility of both the cost as well as the public support and the likelihood of being able to raise the financial resources required. A recommendation is with option 2, interim trail until rail as the first choice, with a second choice of rail with trail, being that all else equal, if there is funding and action and timelines that allow for action to be taken quickly, either one of those solutions seem like a good outcome. But with the information we have today and the realities on the ground, literally and figuratively today, the interim trail until rail seems like the most likely outcome to have a net positive impact for Maine, for both the people that are here as well as the people we hope to attract to be here.
Thank you, Nate. Scott?
They was trying really hard to be that third minority.
Yeah, you did.
Good on him. Again, I just want to express my thanks again. This just based on the conversation that we've had for the last 7 or 8 months. It's clear that this is a complicated issue, and kudos to the state for allowing this conversation to happen. I mean, I think this is certainly a beginning of a much longer process, I assume, with more stakeholder engagement and additional sort of decision making. Yarmouth's position has been pretty clear from the beginning. It hasn't changed. I think the public comment and feedback throughout the process has only sort of helped to support that as well. The idea of an interim trail until rail has been sort of as slam dunk a policy conversation in Yarmouth as there's ever been. And again, continue to support that option. And again, thank everybody for their time and effort throughout this process.
Thank you, Scott. Okay.
Bill, just an FYI, I reached out to Jeremiah. He'll be here momentarily. He was running a little late.
Okay. All right. It's predictable, I think, how the vote went today in some regards, but I think I appreciate the sensitivity of those who did at least think about the rail option because I do think it has some viability in the future, and I do hope that we can express that in perhaps the minority opinion, because I truly am just I think it would be very difficult to bring the rail back once the rails were removed and the trail was located on it. If there was a way to locate the trail and co-locate at the same time, I think that would serve a lot of purposes. But I certainly respect the process and the next steps. So, Chris, you led us off. Your thoughts about a second round around the room? I think everybody did a good job expressing where they were at. The majority opinion, I think, even with Jeremiah's vote or without it, here he is. Okay, man. Last vote. We're deadlocked. Where are you, man? All right. Jeremiah Bartlett, representing the city of Portland. Jeremiah, we just went around the table. Everybody had 2 minutes to express their opinion. If they were leaning toward a rail with trail, a trail only, or a rail only. Currently, a rail with trail is shared by Jonathan, Tony, and myself. A trail only is everyone else except for Charles, and Charles put a little asterisk after his to say They do have, he has come across rails that have had trails on them in his experience, so if that's the way the committee went, he would be okay with that for the most part. And I think Nate said if it was possible to co-locate, he would look at that, but timing was essential to him as well. So that's the first round. We are preparing for a second round, so I'll give you a second to breathe. Chris, your thoughts about a second round? Are you comfortable that everybody got? I know Tony has about 14 more minutes. If you want to all give him your time, he will go through it. But, and I'm teasing you, Tony, because I do appreciate what you say.
Things were not an adequate way to make a decision of this importance.
Right. So Jeremiah, when you are ready, we'll sit here and look at you until you are, but pull the mic to you and pull the mic close. And Natalie was the, New Gloucester abstained. They just said they weren't prepared to vote, so.
I recently told my director there needed to be two of me, and it's becoming increasingly clear. I need to divide via mitosis or something. So I came into this process, to be honest with you, not having thought a lot about this at all. So I had to do a fair amount of digging, check around, talk to sort of everybody. And, you know, after talking to folks like Metro, after understanding what land uses proposed in and around this facility were looking to be for Portland, after being reminded that about 9 years ago there was a city council resolve, a joint Portland, Lewiston, Auburn resolve to promote high-quality transit between the multiple communities, it became clear to me that any outcome that would preclude certain things or potentially preclude some things were going to be problematic. And talking to other staff in the city, including my director, you know, we all sort of arrived on the same page. So, you know, sort of to be general about it, a rail with trail, some type of co-location outcome is really something at this point that you know, we're seeking for an outcome at this time. It's become clear to our policymakers that there needs to be some more time and effort dedicated to this conversation. So we're setting up a conversation with our Sustainability and Transportation Committee. To be honest with you, the time frame for this study has not allowed for the depth of conversation that we need to have in Portland on this topic. And, you know, I had hoped we would have something, you know, much more formal for here today. We don't. But that's what we're taking to this conversation at this time. I can provide more information or background on that, but that's where we're at.
Thank you, Jeremiah. I think I'm just going to ask people if they have anything more to say the second round, because I certainly do. And Chris, I'm going to start with you again, if you don't mind. And
Yeah, I can kind of pick up where I left off. One of the things, we're talking about feasibility, and you can time me, Bill, if you want.
I will.
I don't believe we have the population or the employment density right now in this region and outside the region into the Lewiston Auburn area to support rail, certainly not passenger rail service right now. We did population employment forecasting for our long-range transportation plan in the PAX region, unanimously adopted last week by 18 member communities, 7 transit agencies. And, you know, we're showing 55,000 additional people in the 18 city and town region by 2045. That's not that much, and certainly not enough to support passenger rail service like interurban light rail that we looked at as part of this process. You know, we looked at examples in La Jolla, that's, you know, San Diego and Camden, New Jersey. That's Philadelphia right across the river. You know, pretty significant metro areas. Our region is not that right now, and it likely won't be in the next 25 years. And at the end of the day, I mean, we heard from Nate about timeliness, and Councilor Kuhn about feasibility and practicability. And, you know, a trail until rail alternative could probably be built in 5 years, maybe 10 years. A rail with trail or a trail with rail, you it may never get built. And will it just lead to inaction and lead to nothing happening on the corridor? And that's what I truly fear, given the population forecast, again, that we've looked at. Thirdly, there's a parallel rail corridor owned by CSX. We've talked about this, so I won't go into it in depth. And even if rail were restored on the St. Lawrence and the Atlantic, it only gets us to the Danville Junction area, and you'd still have to coordinate with CSX on the remainder into the downtown Lewis and Auburn. So that's where I am now and where I'll likely be. Thanks, everyone, for contributing.
Thank you, Chris. Dick, anything to add?
Yeah, so I spent 10 years in the legislature, and I don't think there's a single issue I've ever observed that has had such engaged and widespread support as putting a trail on this corridor. So that, to me, is powerful. It fits Maine's brand of outdoor recreation. It fits our future of active transportation. It just, to me, is so suiting of what our region and our state should be prioritizing. Second, I don't think we can build this thing next to a track. I've looked at, for example, page 31 of the report goes into the environmental sensitivities. I think we're going to face all kinds of obstacles. I think to try to put this trail next to the track is just not going to happen. And cost is one aspect, but the environment is probably the even bigger aspect. So, that direction to me is, in my view, is killing the trail. Every study that's looked at putting a train between Portland and Lewiston, Auburn has said not to do it on any of the corridors that go to Ocean Gateway, because Portland Transportation Center is where the connectivity is for trains. So, again, as Chris said, we've got two corridors here. We can accomplish both. And we're not going to do it if we end up having to put a trail next to the rail on this corridor. It's just not going to, I'm highly discouraged by where this council has ended up. But that's, I guess the other thing I just want to, when people have been referring to the cost, we keep doing the cost from mile zero. And I don't think any of us in the trails community have been advocating for rebuilding the bridge. So the trail until rail option is not this $45 million option. It is a $29 to $34 million option, which to me is kind of at the outer bounds of feasible, that we can go and privately fundraise for that. We can get local shares for that. To me, it's the boundary of what's feasible. And that's what I think we should do.
Thank you, Dick. Angela? You could use the mic. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with what has been said, and I just want to put out there that I appreciate that everybody here is concerned about the environment, about economic benefits, and about alternatives to transportation. I mean, we're all on the same page as looking for those things. What BCM, our stance is also representing our members, and also after the public comments, like Dick said, it feels like that the trail is something that people are looking for, as well as the traffic safety concerns are huge in Maine. BCM hears about that all the time, and having an off-road route for people to use. And because DOT has just put together an active transportation plan, this trail would be great to be part of that. Thank you.
Diane?
So I found this whole process very interesting, and I've never been on a panel like this before, and I learned a lot. And throughout the whole process, I have leaned towards the trail until rail. And then when I read the report that came out last week, that just cemented my feelings for the same reasons that Dick just said, and also Chris. And to me, it goes back to the feasibility, the cost, But most importantly, I read through every single one of the emails that were sent out. That was a
That's a
daunting
lot.
task. But, you know, there is a lot of sentiment in these communities that they want a trail. And if we wait for rail with trail, I just don't see that happening. And I think we'll be here 10 years from now going through this again. But it's the feasibility for me. I support rail with trail. I mean, if we could do that, and if we could see a path to do that, that would be my ultimate choice, but I don't see that. Not today, I don't see it, and I stand firm with my decision, rail until trail.
Thank you, Diane. All right, now, Natalie, we know you were saving it for this round, so,
I guess I just will say that I did go to the select board, and we talked about it a little bit, but we being me and the select board, had both received emails kind of on both sides, and without having adequate time to do any sort of public hearing or public output session, they chose not to go forward with any formal opinion, which is kind of where we're coming from.
makes sense. Thank you, Natalie. Thanks for clarifying that, too. All right, Jeremiah, back to you.
So, from what I'm hearing, connection to the north doesn't warrant some sort of high-frequency quality transit service. I should note that Gorham, a community with much less population density, I'm sitting on the committee for an $800,000 study being run by Mr. Chop's organization. At the same time that the main turnpike is looking at a $300 million connection road. So we're focusing on both of these things for communities that have less population than the communities to the north of Portland. I see an issue with that. I'm also concerned that we're hearing now that the trail advocates aren't particularly interested in a reconnection to downtown Portland, which really undercuts the conversation here for us.
Let's get around.
I want to finish, Dick. So this conversation has seemed very suburban to me, to be honest. This has been probably the most frustrating, overly sped up process. There's equity concerns. I have a lot of concerns on this one. And I've been in this business for 25 years, and it's pretty clear to me there are certain interests that have been carrying this along, and I don't see the equity in how this has been playing out. And when I look at all the things that are going on for the city of Portland, I have to ask these questions. And I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is.
Thank you, Jeremiah. That's fair. We are going to go around the table. So, Jonathan?
Yeah, I'd echo what Jeremiah shared as we look to the south. I think I highlighted our goal as the city of Auburn is to document what we would see as some of the supplemental steps that would be part of implementing our recommendation. Through this process, it's become clear to me that the commissioner is looking for perspective in this report, that this report doesn't move and set the commissioner and the department's recommendation. They wanted this analysis. I think the statute might need to be reviewed at some point. You know, the thought that 70% of the population in the corridor has 10 to 15% of the voting weight is interesting in terms of it's like for the U.S. Senate. So regardless of size, you all get the same vote. I've long had a concern. This goes back to when I was mayor of how Lewis and Auburn and Portland, the regional planning entities, have sort of set up a great wall of China between the two, as if they're their own autonomous kingdoms. The LA region's about to update our long-range plan. We intend to look at our connections to Portland. We attempted to have PACs look at connections to Lewis and Auburn in their planning effort, and I'd say it was sort of tacit interest. The southern part of Auburn, where this rail line, it doesn't end, the St. Lawrence and Atlantic continues. The area that we're looking at rezoning that right now is really zoned for no development is the size of Portland and South Portland combined.
Geographically.
Geographically. I mean, we're the size of Falmouth, Scarborough, Westbrook, Portland, South Portland together. We're a very large city geographically. We already have in the pipeline about 2,500 new housing units. That's without our zoning changes. We fully expect to see significant infill And all that's changed over the last 3 to 4 years. So we're aggressively trying to help meet Southern Maine's housing needs. And we think understanding this corridor and those actionable next steps are going to be part of that.
Thank you, Jonathan. Tony?
Well, I did print some of these up to pass around, so if you could pass those around, the map on there, you will find the word robust is very applicable, as I see that's what's in there. I also just want to note the PAC's comment about we don't have the population or density, but we appear to have the population or density for 2,500 car parking garages on St. John Street and thousands of parking garages in downtown Portland, widening highways, expanding highways. I'm going to just finish what I said, what I was saying. The RUAC report consultant did a passenger train study, did study passenger train service, but its analysis was incomplete. It assumed costs for environmental considerations that may not be warranted. Even so, the report did not rule out passenger rail on this route and specifies that a passenger train service can indeed operate on the line. The majority of public comments, most received before the committee completed its work, supported passenger train use if it could be done. We're hearing this around the table today. Few, if any, of the parties supported removing the railroad infrastructure either temporarily or permanently. The report further indicated further analysis should be done to determine if a rail and trail can both use the corridor. As we approach the end of this process, MRTC supports a report to the Commissioner of Transportation that the next steps in determining best use of this corridor is an independent analysis of the corridor between Portland Milepost 0.0 and Auburn for a light rail passenger train service, and it, of course, should consider how a trail can be incorporated into the development plan. We believe that a final corridor plan must include potential development of a passenger train service for interurban light rail train station locations and a detailed scope of reconstruction of the railroad. The next step should bring all parties together, not around whether we can or cannot do this, but rather a plan developed for presentation to the communities along the corridor for a decision to be made in an informed manner as to what brings the best value to our region, our states, and our towns, and the climate. Smart Growth Mobility Project sought to bring advocates for all modes into the planning process. The Casco Bay Trails Alliance report emphasizes conversion of the rails to trails. Both parties could have done better. Let's move into our next step and develop a plan that, as supported by public comments, includes rails and trails. The RUAC should support a recommendation to analyze this corridor for rail with trail use.
Thank you, Tony. Amy?
Thank you. I guess I would offer, with some humility, as this is my first meeting, that my understanding was the goal for today was to establish a majority and a minority position. And
Correct.
by my calculation, we're at 7-3-1. I know we had some equivocation on 2 votes, but in my experience as a decision maker, you get 1. And looking at 1, it's 7-3-1. So I just want to offer that because I think those numbers reflect the community sentiment that many of us have heard, that folks want the trail. They want it as soon as practicable, and recognize that if hypothetically down the road demand was shown to exist, it is revocable. We heard comment at the prior meeting that, oh, once these trails are converted, they never come back. I would offer that maybe that's because they're terrific and people love them and they adjust their own commuting patterns. I know you mentioned going to Europe and seeing the trains. I would commend looking at the city of Copenhagen, for example, where people have really invested in active transit, and it is a viable commuting method in a cold weather climate, much like ours. So I would suggest that not going back might be because it works out great for communities. One final thing, I just want to address the equity issue that Mr. Bartlett raised. I think that's really important and ought to be a focus in implementation. I know I was moved by the public comment earlier this month from someone who is a wheelchair user and spoke about accessibility to trails, and maybe that will speak to paving as opposed to other surfaces. But I just want to recognize that's important in implementation, but should not be holding us back from going ahead with what I think is a pretty clear vote count.
Thank you, Amy. I had 641, so I will have to go back and look at that. But
I have 741.
You have
That's what I
7?
Yeah.
Skip Jeremiah, he can't.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, but he's on the 4.
Okay, it's 3. It's Tony, Bill, Jeremiah, or Trail with Rail.
And Bill.
And me.
Jonathan.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
yeah,
Jonathan.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, okay.
It's 4.
Gotcha.
Okay. All right, thank you. Well, my purpose, when I look at this situation, I don't give up on Pasumscot Street. I look at that as potentially a multimodal center, and conversion of that abandoned cement plant there into maybe a small transit hub where, you know, metro buses are showing up and bringing people to the airport, to the transportation center, and down to Congress Street for other transfers on the metro line. You know, we all have climate action plans. We all have sustainability committees, and they want to see better use other than automobiles of our transit system. So when we look at our environmental obstacles, we're going to have environmental obstacles regardless of what we build, a rail and trail or just a trail or just a train system. I think they're all going to have to go through some type of environmental impact statement, and even taking off those rails, you're going to have to get equipment in there, and then building the trails. All of that's going to be subject to some type of environmental scrutiny, and there's going to be some challenges there. There's lots of wetlands, there's lots of water, there's lots of other life that's living there that's going to have to be impacted, but I believe it can be done. I believe when I look at the next 15-year plan of the Turnpike and $915 million, I think we can do better. I keep coming back to, I feel like we're giving up on trying to do something that is workable. Lewiston Auburn is over, I don't know, 61, 62,000 people right now combined, is almost the same size of Portland. Those are our two most populated centers in the state of Maine. Their unemployment rates are about a point apart. People shared with me that, now this was a long time ago when the trains actually did run into Portland, that people were being brought in from the Lewiston Auburn area for employment on the docks in Portland. So it's not a novelty. It's been done before, and why we gave up on it, I don't know. Well, the car made it a lot easier, and it was just more convenient. But now we're paying for the sins of the past, and we have to do something a little bit more than just a recreational piece. And I'm not saying give up on the trail until the train can be located. I'm saying let's plan out and look at the scope of this and saying, all right, is this a section where the trail can go pretty easily? And there's lots of sections that it can. At least half of this corridor is not a difficult reach for a trail system. The other half is a little bit more challenging and may require to be off the rail corridor because it's just, as many of you pointed out, there's just not the room. But those connections happen everywhere. So to me, I'm not giving up on the trail piece of it. I'm just saying that a co-location doesn't give up on the train piece of it. And that's kind of where I'm at. I've got the support of the majority of my council on that position. And I think that's what we'd like to see. And we're going to participate regardless of the process. So I think for me, is it 641 or 741? 741? Okay, I'll fix my math, and we'll move around. All right, Charles, you're up.
Thanks, Bill. It has come up before in these meetings about the parallel CSX transportation line, the former Pan Am main line. There seems to be assumptions that, gee, we could just run commuter trains or passenger trains or freight trains over there. And just to clarify with Maine DOT and VHB, was CSX contacted as part of this study or this initiative about putting passenger trains over on their track?
As it relates to this, no.
Okay. So they have not been contacted or agreed to such a traffic
I would
situation?
say they're aware. They're
Okay.
aware of this study and what's going on, as well as the study on the expansion of Lewiston.
But they have
They're
not
aware of
agreed to
what's going
add
on.
traffic?
We have not approached them about adding any type of service yet because we're not there.
Okay. And then a question for Jonathan. As far as connectivity, does the city of Lewiston and Auburn still own the right-of-way between the airport area and over into Lewiston?
Yeah, conceivably, you could continue on the St. Lawrence to the airport and then travel east along the Lewiston-Auburn main line and get into the Mill District in Lewiston.
So it would not be necessary to switch over to CSX at Danville Junction?
You could feasibly serve downtown Lewiston-Auburn without needing to use CSX.
Okay. That's all I got.
Thank you, Charles. That was very helpful. Nate?
Nothing to add.
Shocking. All right, Scott, you can't get his 2 minutes, but
All right,
go
here
ahead.
you go. Yeah, I'll save time too. I don't think we're at the position where we can convince other folks. I think people are pretty well, convinced of what their position is, and that's fine, and that's why we do the process. So, again, appreciate everybody's time and effort on this, and our position will stay the same.
Okay, well, we've been around twice, and I think the 7-4-1 vote is predictable, but I think it's also indicative of some of the struggle that several of us have had on this process, because while we have listened and tried to come up with a compromise of some type, it's about time, and people do want to see something done, and I understand that. I do understand that, but I also understand what we lose, and that's the hard part for us. This is a recommendation, so this is only going to the commissioner, and then he's got to decide what the next step is. With the removal of any rail, that it requires a legislative process as well, so there's another step at the state level that has to occur as well. I would say, Nate, are you comfortable with the comments we've had so far around the table to at least take a stab at it?
Sure.
I know you'll get some comments from members of the council here that would like to be incorporated into the report. Our biggest incorporation, and I'll speak on behalf of most of the towns here, is just the process to include the abutting neighbors sooner rather than later, so that the towns can at least feel that their voices have been heard, and that they've been sitting around a table, not on a camera, but around tables to look at the plans and see what the impacts are and see what the buffering might look like, and just some, I'm just going to say decency, because I think it's really difficult to go through when we're not talking to the people that are impacted the most. And that's typically what we've done with most of our own public processes. And then we'll see what happens, after that. I believe there's going to be a lot of information that will probably flood your office, but not from me, but from others. But I think just do your best to move forward. I think you've been very diplomatic, both you and Nate Moulton, in this process, and we do appreciate that. I think it's been a challenging process, because most of us didn't know what was going on in the beginning, including myself, until Nate had the Jerry Maguire moment, and that was great at one of the meetings. And Nate, I really appreciate that. I really do. And I appreciate the passion of everybody in this room, because it's made the process very difficult, and I think that's a good process when it's hard to come to a decision and a vote. But Jeremiah?
I didn't actually go twice.
Oh.
But
right.
I just want to leave with one thing, which is, I think we're having differences of opinion and maybe some frustration on whether or not it's trail with rail or trail until rail. What the irony in all of this is, there's one thing we all seem to have in common, which is we do want some active transportation. I want to note that Portland has struggled for quite some time to come up with a good strategy for transportation to the north. So regardless how this plays out, I mean, that is an important topic, and I don't want that to get lost in these differences of opinion. It's an important thing.
And I think that's really important too, to make sure that you get those points to Nate Howard, so that he can basically sprinkle those into that report. That these are important points, and I think anybody watching the tape will say, people were pretty respectful. People voiced their opinion, but they had their opinions, and that's okay. Scott?
Just a quick question to the Nates. So Bill went over kind of the framework of the next steps. So, once this report gets completed, it gets sent to the commissioner's office. Is there some sort of timeline once it gets to his office within the statute itself, or is it just kind of discretionary at that point?
No, there isn't a timeline. It does say if he first a decision whether he accepts the recommendation. If he accepts a recommendation that includes removal of the rail, then that has to go to legislature. So then I think it actually says we have to submit a bill.
You do.
So that's the formal process. But there isn't any timeline for that. The only timeline is the 9 months for this council.
And just to clarify, the Nate's on that side of the table is what you're intending, right? Just want to clarify that. Is there a statutory expectation for the commissioner to, the commissioner can choose not to accept the recommendation, but the commissioner is not statutorily required to do something, correct? Like, the commissioner could just sit on this and not take any action.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
Okay. But if the commissioner accepts the recommendation, that implies that action will be taken in according to what the recommendation was?
I don't think so.
The only action required would be to submit a bill if it's a sort of non-rail use. That's the only action required.
But this is
Yep.
the same recommendation that came out of the Mountain Division.
Right, the Mountain Division,
The
he
same-
accepted
the
it,
Same
and
thing.
he will put in a bill as required, so.
But it won't be until the next session since, or will it be? Will it be in this session?
I would, probably this, I'd assume it was this decision, yeah.
And will you be able to keep us posted on that? Will that be on the website, or would that, where would we look for that, Nate? Other than calling you like every day and saying, hey, what's going on?
What do you know about that?
Which should be the first option anyways.
We,
Yeah, yeah, we-
Yeah, that's good.
Tony, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'll go right back to where I started.
Okay, talk closer to the mic.
It's kind of hidden, it's kind of hidden in this report, but you said something about the commissioner accepting a recommendation to tear up the tracks. I hope that the recommendation says that the 7 votes were to tear up the tracks. That's what that vote is for, clearly. We had an option to look at both, the PACs and the trails people and the small communities in between Portland and Auburn have chosen to tear up the tracks. And that is what the report to the commissioner should say.
But Tony, point of order for you, aren't these tracks unusable for anything?
No, absolutely not. And we've given you information that you have not replied to. We've had our engineers out there. We can run light rail right now on that track.
Well, the freight guy is saying that they're.
You could initiate with very minor maintenance, freight service.
For freight service only, freight service, no passenger service.
We don't have anything to do with that.
You don't care about
My
passenger, okay.
engineers do, and yes, the answer is yes.
All right, thank you,
Absolutely yes.
okay. It wouldn't go very fast, is what Jonathan said. So 11 miles an hour is not a transit service, but I have seen the reports where there were train systems that could function on those tracks, but I don't know if those were ever vetted by DOT or VHB. The Silver Bullet was the last passenger train? The ski train.
And it ran 75 miles.
Okay. All right. Nate, anything more you need?
Yeah, so we have 2 members that aren't here. So we have 13 of the 15 voted, so we have those votes. 2 members that aren't here. Talked about reaching out to those members, so Brian
Brian and
Harris
Becky.
and Becky. However they vote, that wouldn't change the minority majority,
Right.
right?
Right.
Okay, and I will do that. We do know Brian he uses part of the rail, so, but he's also talked about a trail, but we don't know how they'd vote. So I'll reach out to them, let the council know the final tally, which those minority won't change. We talked about having the January meeting. Is that still required? You still want to have that meeting?
I mean, Bill, if you wouldn't mind.
Scott?
I mean, I'd be happy to hear what Auburn has pulled together. I would suggest it being a virtual meeting, but
Virtual
other
meeting.
than that, I don't have any problem meeting in January.
John?
It sounded like, from your description, Bill, that Nate was going to, based on what he heard, draft what that very brief recommendation looked like. So yeah, to me, I just want to have a look at that. We had some things we wanted to think about with what the actionable steps would be, because we don't want to just make a recommendation. We'd like to have some encouragement of steps that DOT or other stakeholders could then drive.
Okay.
So we can look at that. I wouldn't want to then create a supplemental minority.
Sure.
But I mean, we can always hold that date, and if people want to log in for a half an hour, if they had any questions or comments on the final draft, I don't think we need to travel to a meeting.
Okay.
Okay,
That's all.
that's fair.
Okay.
That's fair.
That's a Zoom meeting on the 4th Thursday, so the 26th of January, same time, Zoom meeting. I will get the recommendation and summary out 2 weeks in advance of the 26th, which would be January 12th.
One other question?
Chris?
Question for Jeremiah. Will the city of Portland have time by the January meeting to get together with the council or a subset of the council to receive their input on this and then inform this body at the January meeting?
We don't have a date scheduled. It's very, in fact, I would say it's almost certain to be unlikely. As I've noted previously, a 9-month process entirely possible that our Sustainability and Transportation Committee may not discuss this until February. And again, I don't have a date set yet, but they have.
So no comments coming formally from the city of Portland through the council, because you're not talking into the mic, so I'm punishing you.
You can
Or
punish
from your
me for that.
sustainability
That's
committee.
my bad. I mean, essentially what we're carrying right now is the internal staff opinions, primarily discussions within Public Works and Planning. But yes, we do intend to, well, not just intend, but the Sustainability and Transportation Committee has asked to have this conversation taken for their consideration. So I just do not know right now whether or not that will be a January or February item. However, you know, if we are within the constraints of this 9 months, then the staff recommendation has to stand. I also realize that, you know, that things have to keep moving, so.
No, I appreciate that.
Just noted that the 9-month timeline is a challenge for us, that's all.
Jonathan?
Probably more so for DOT situational awareness. The city of Lewiston, which is the second largest city, they're not on the corridor, so they don't have a seat, but they're certainly impacted by the future of that corridor. They've reached out and they plan to take this up in front of their council in February. So DOT you'll hear from Lewiston with respect to their observations and thoughts on this corridor, just so you know that that's coming.
Thank you, Jonathan. See a hand anywhere on this side? Anyone else on this side? Anything else you need from us, Nate? Or are you good right now?
I'm good.
All right.
Anything else? No?
All right, then I will open up the public comment. Those comments will be, you have to come up to the mic to speak into the microphone, and you will have 2 minutes to voice your comments. So please state your name and the town you're from so we can get that into the record as well.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
You sure? All right. Couple of things I think were missing from the conversation. One is it came up that there are certain groups that weren't included. And I'm wondering at what point do they now get included if this is going to go forward as a recommendation. I think there are several groups that could be included. Another was, and Tony pointed out that the financing for this action could come from the New Starts program. And I'm not sure if anybody understands the New Starts program pays for something from start to finish. I mean, it eliminates the financial risk for the towns or city or whatever. And Tony didn't explain that, but maybe Nate could go into that in more detail. But that's a complete process. They take you from beginning to end without having to go back for asking for more money. So I don't know how that would be impactful here, but it would. Another person who probably should have been around the table is Finn Sprague, but he made me aware of, and I don't think anybody here is familiar with, I think it was Bezansen's rail bikes. There was, at one point in time, coming out of the Portland company, bikes that could ride on the rails with one wheel on one rail and a brace on the other rail that could go from here to New York. And this is factual history. So I'm just curious, I mean, if we at least leave the rails in place, maybe some entrepreneur could come up with that idea all over again. That'd be kind of a fun ride for exercise and for just getting out and getting fresh air. But I'm sure there are lots of little pieces, that could factor into this. But it's like everybody else has said, the value of the steel is not worth pulling it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, my name's Bruce Sleeper, and I'm legal counsel for Train Riders Northeast, and I live in Portland. Train Riders came to this process very late, and just about midnight last night, I sent in some comments. It's about 6 pages of comments, and emailed it as well. So some of the things that we've said there have been gone over here today and probably earlier in the process. But I did want to touch on a couple of things. First of all, trail until rail is a mirage. And why is that? Well, yes, part of it is because many of the lines that have been rail banked around the country, for example, really aren't worthwhile having rail put back in. I mean, I'm sitting here and I don't see a whole lot of groundswell of support for putting in a rail line up to Dover-Foxcroft again. But where you do have a future need for a rail line, removal of the track and the ballast does make it far more expensive to reconvert it to rail use, to the point where it doesn't become economically viable in many instances. It's basically like rebuilding a whole rail line. So that means that throughout the country, we have several thousand miles of rail-banked line, former rail line, and we have probably less than 100 miles that's ever been reconverted. Secondly, there were some problems in the study itself. The study, for example, included trail users buying stuff while they were using the trail, and that would not be on the trail itself. On the other hand, apparently people who ride in trains only buy food on the trains, because there was no amount of economic impact shown for people who spend the night, people who buy food when they get off the train.
Can we give Bruce another couple minutes, please?
In fact, it wouldn't even take me a couple.
All right.
The second thing is that also impacts the indirect economic impact, because that's based upon the initial purchases by riders either on the train or users of the trail. Housing units were very low. Predicted housing units were extremely low compared to what's been seen along the Downeaster line. Now, obviously, the Downeaster line has larger population centers, but I mean, we're talking a situation where one study predicted 42,000 housing units in proximity to stations along the Downeaster line that would in part or in whole be created as a result of the Downeaster service through 2030. Additionally, the study indicates it'll cost $274 million to upgrade the tracks between Portland and Auburn for passenger rail service. That apparently includes perhaps as much as $60 million for positive train control, something that's not required until you get at least 6 round trips a day on the route for passenger rail. So to a large extent, that would not be necessary, at least for quite some time. Finally, train riders has no problem with a rail with trail, so long as the trail is properly constructed, separated, et cetera, from the rail line. Something that has not been the situation, for example, up in the trail between Augusta and Gardner. I said finally, but this is my finally. Is this the time to be doing this, to make this study? First of all, there's another study ongoing for use of passenger rail up through to Lewiston from Portland. What you'll be doing here is undercutting whatever that study concludes, or at least prejudging it. In addition, a lot of the facts that were, or some of the facts that were used in the current study are based upon passenger use on the Downeaster line. Well, the passenger use period that was used was September 2021 through October or August of 2022, a time when the Downeaster was recovering from the COVID situation. At this point in time, in 2019, we had over 500,000 passengers on the Downeaster, and the study period it was 437,000, something in that range. The Downeaster's coming back and is at about 90+% of what it was in 2019, and so that supports additional ridership figures that should be used to support the study. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
Happy holidays, everyone. My name is Ed Suslovic from Portland, and going back to my legislative days, I'm going to repeat the 2 biggest lies most often heard under the dome. I did not intend to speak on this topic, and I will be brief. I'm from Portland, where my experience has been that the public comments, both to this group in writing and in person, as well as before the Portland City Council when they took up the resolution calling for the creation of this council, were overwhelmingly supportive of trail only, and trail now, not trail never. So I want to make that clear. And I would point out that, as I said, over 90% of the public comments that you all received, both online and in person, were for the trail until rail option. Several of your panelists have mentioned they've never experienced such a widespread margin. We're not talking 70-30 or even 80-20. We're talking 90-10 in favor of the trail until rail option. And let's be clear, as you've heard several of your members state, the rail with trail is the do-nothing option. Let's be clear about that. And because the feasibility of building both, the cost, the environmental implications means that this will never get done. And this public asset will continue to molder and generate no return on investment. Finally, the reason to support trail only is that this corridor, the one that is under consideration here, running from the former B&M Baked Bean, now the Rue Institute, to just south of Danville Junction, not even into downtown, has no viable rail use. Let me repeat that. There is no viable rail use for this corridor. You have a parallel line that currently, according to MDOT, serves 6 freight trains a day. Plenty of capacity should you want to add more freight service or passenger service down the road. Plenty of capacity. I'm going to request an extension just like the previous speaker. I went online and searched for the smallest commuter rail system in the country that I could find, based upon the numbers you heard our GP-COG staff person give about population and population growth. The closest I could find was Nashville, Tennessee, the Star service. One line runs about 30 miles. Thought it would be a pretty good comparison. So I looked. Metro Nashville's population, Metro Nashville, 2 million people. That's significantly larger than the entire state of Maine's population. City of Nashville's population, over 700,000 people in the city of Nashville. So they're moving people from a metro area of 2 million people to a city of 700,000 people contained in that metro area, about a 30-mile railroad line. Average daily ridership, anyone want to take a guess? 800. 800 people per day ride the Star on average. So let's scale it down a little bit. Nashville, 700,000. Portland's not even 70,000. In the 30 years that I've lived in Portland, it hasn't even grown 6% over 30 years. We're still about 68,000 people. So say it's roughly 10% of Nashville. So 10% of 800 riders, that's 80 riders. Reasonable projection would be 80 riders a day. On the 20-plus round trips that have been talked about, that comes out to about two passengers per train. If you went with the Downeaster's schedule of 5 round trips, so 10 train movements a day, that's 8 people per train moving between Lewiston, Auburn, and Portland. Does that really sound like that would be a competitive project for these federal grants that people are talking about? They don't mention that they're competitive. So I just implore you to think about the rail with trail option is really the do-nothing option because there will not be rail use on this corridor. Thank you.
Sue Ellen Boardwell. I live in Yarmouth, Maine, and I'm president of the Casco Bay Trail Alliance. So you all know where I stand on this. So I'm not even going to say anything about the pros of the trail and the cons of the rail. But what I want to do is say, as frustrating as this process was to observe, I want to thank every single one of you for putting in the time and the effort. And wherever we go with this, I think we will all be working together in whatever that process becomes. So thank you very much from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, Sue.
Just a quick note to add while we wait for our next guest. Portland actually has about twice the population density of Nashville.
Okay, we're not going back there.
Carl Wilcox, New Gloucester, Maine. I have a question for DOT. keep hearing all these public comments, but I didn't comment on Facebook. I saw you put out a Facebook post, and there were a lot of comments, and they were for the train, rail. So I'd like, have you analyzed those, and how many were pro and how many were against?
We did not include those comments. So it's the comments that were submitted through the website and comments that provided directly written comments. So not the Facebook comments, no.
So why'd you bother with the Facebook, and are you going to evaluate those?
That Facebook ad was for the public meeting. That's what that was, the announcement for the public meeting.
Okay.
Yep.
So did you glance at it? Did you like kind of
I
get
saw
a
the
feel?
comments, but we did not solicit Facebook comments.
All right. Well, I disagree that there weren't a lot of public comments. They commented. They thought they were commenting. It was made in a public forum. It was for trains. And as far as this gentleman's, so he's basically saying Nashville is 700,000 and 2 million people are somewhere else, and this train went from there to there. I mean, that's crazy. Crazy. Everything you said there was crazy, because your fundamental premise is nuts. I have no idea where the Star train runs from Nashville to where, but I bet there isn't 2 million people at the other end of it. With that, I want to point out the Portland Press-Herald, back in May, said that Auburn is the place for building housing. They have built 800 houses that have been constructed or under constructing, and 2,000 more are planned. And Lewiston, Auburn's population currently is 60,000. That of Portland is 68. And the population of Lewiston, Auburn is 68% greater than Brunswick, Bath, and Topsom. But somehow the Downeaster gets built to there, and there's no transportation to Lewiston, Auburn. And I live about 50 feet off of Route 231, which is the shortest toll-free path between Auburn and downtown Portland. And this train tracks is about 300 yards behind my house. And every morning, the traffic starts at 5:30, and it's continuous. 90% of it is southbound. In the evening, coming back, I cannot walk across the street to get my mail. I have to pause and wait. I get my mail, I have to pause and wait for it to go back the other way. So I hear all this nonsense about there aren't going to be commuters. There's plenty of commuters. And since those people have been paying gas tax to go, they've been double taxed. They pay for the main turnpike, and then they pay for the gas tax to drive on the main turnpike. So that gas tax can go over and pay for this bridge construction on 295 in Yarmouth and Falmouth for the people who don't pay any toll at all. It's just socioeconomic discrimination, and the suburban comment is right on the money.
Thank you, Carl.
Can I just mention something about Carl? He is correct on the unsolicited, as opposed to these comments on here. The unsolicited comments on Facebook were 90% in favor of rail, as were the comments on the Portland Press-Herald site, which we have for our records if you'd like to have them for yours.
Thank you, Tony.
I was going to say, if his planner's here, he should talk about getting a crosswalk, maybe DOT could help you to get.
All right, Jonathan, we'll do the municipal infrastructure meeting after this one,
I sent
so.
it to your office.
Oh, the turnpike now.
Mr. Bell.
Good afternoon. Art Bell. I live over in Yarmouth, and I had read the agenda for today's meeting, and I wasn't aware that you guys were going to be voting, so this has been a early Christmas gift for me. I look forward to, I also represent Yarmouth in the state legislature, and I look forward to the commissioner's recommendation when it comes through, and eagerly look forward to working on this and making it happen. Thank you all for
Thank you, Art.
participation. Happy holidays.
Likewise.
My name is Stephen Parisi. I live in North Yarmouth. I'm totally in favor of keeping the rails right where they are. A rail with trail option, fine. I don't have a problem with that. But I strongly feel that if you rip up the rails, you'll never get them back again. it's gonna be way too much money to replace them at a future date. And we gotta look into the future, whether it be 20 years from now, 30 years from now. Our population density is growing. I've heard people here say, well, we haven't got the population density. North Yarmouth issued, 140 building permits in the last 2 years? 800 new housing units going in Auburn, a couple thousand more after that. Our population is growing faster than it ever has before. Thinking of the future, because we just might want those rails later on, both for passenger and freight service. I think, I don't know for sure, but I strongly feel that the B&M factory would still be there if they had rail service. I can't blame the St. Lawrence and Atlantic for discontinuing because they were the only customer at the time. But maybe if the state of Maine actively encouraged businesses that might benefit from rail use to locate along the rail line instead of someplace else, we'd have a good reason to bring rail back. And you people would have some customers. I think it'd be a great thing. Adds to the employment base. More people will have jobs. And I know my time's up, but that's how I feel.
Thank you.
Just leave the rails right where they are.
Thank you. All right, that looks like it for our public comment today. We will reconvene via, I guess it's going to be Zoom, or is that what you're going to do?
Yep.
Zoom meeting on January 26th at 1 p.m. So thank you all for attending and participating today. Much appreciated, and I'll take an adjournment by unanimous consensus. So,
If I might? All moved.
Tony?
My holiday begins, man. I was waiting to get this thing out of my way. So happy holidays to everybody. Thank you, man.
Happy holidays to you all, too. Thank you, Tony.
I did bring some calendars over here.
Do they have any trails on them? So. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I wasn't sure either of you.
Merry Christmas, Dick.
That was one that.
Merry Christmas.
The name, I think that was one, it was K and the C, and I was